So we've all heard of the term data protection. It's become very hot news in the mainstream media, and the public are clearly very worried about how well the organisations who have loads of personal information about us all are looking after that data. Let's find out a little more about this subject and about a new European law from European data protection expert Jamie Capildea, who joins us now. Good morning, Jamie.
Good morning, Bill. How are you?
Good. How is sunny Brighton this morning?
Not so sunny. The sun seems to have vanished for the week.
Oh, dear. You've had summer now, have you? Is that it?
Yeah, Monday and Tuesday.
Oh, dear. Now, first question, Jamie. Data or data?
Data.
Yeah?
Definitely data.
Who says data, then?
I don't know. It's not something you hear often. I guess that's the tomato thing.
I guess so.
It's definitely data.
Very good. Data protection, obviously, we just said there, is big news. And when news stories break on national news about our data being potentially hacked in companies, it's obviously a very worrying thing. And there's been a new survey about how worried we are, isn't there?
There has, yes, and almost over two-thirds of people are actually concerned now about the information they give companies, so whether that's giving it to your, telephone provider or energy provider, or even, more important information, legal or insurance or banking. People are now worried about the amount of information they're giving these companies, and then what those companies are doing, firstly with the data, and secondly to protect that data, because as you're absolutely right. The breaches are in the paper every day. Companies are being hacked either by individuals inside or outside the organisation, or it's accidental leaks of data, or it's even gangs of people after that data to make money out of it on the dark web.
Yeah.
So people are right to be concerned about what those companies are doing with the data and how it's being protected, because quite often you get no information back the other way from companies that you deal with saying, this is how we're protecting your data.
Yes, and we hear of the Data Protection Act, which is all well and good, but that was kind of drawn up quite a while ago, wasn't it?
Well, it was. It was good 17, 18 years ago, where if you look back then, there was probably only less than 1% of people even use the internet. I would imagine most people hadn't heard of the internet, let alone doing business over the internet or buying products or sharing information. So, yeah, the Data Protection Act was a remnant of a pre-smartphone, pre-internet era, and this is one of the reasons, not just the Protection Act in the UK, but across Europe, it's one of the reasons that the EU are bringing in the new regulation to kind of supersede all of those in-country regulations and have a ubiquitous 28-member state regulation all around the protection of data and how it's looked after.
Yes, so this new European law, so obviously we're in a very interesting situation now. Is this a European law or an EU law?
It's an EU regulation, and the regulation bit is interesting because that word absolutely means it is being pushed upon the 28 member states. There's no voting in or voting out. It's something that everyone has to adhere to.
But if we're out, which we're ostensibly going to be, does that then mean that we don't become in the UK part of that?
Well, that's the interesting bit. So the GDPR basically follows the data, and what that means is that if you're a company outside of the EU and you've got even one customer sat somewhere in the EU with that data around that person, the GDPR still applies to you because you have to adhere to it to be able to handle that one customer. So if you're looking at enormous companies who are, let's say, US-based, they may have hundreds of thousands of customers in Europe, across the countries, they still, even though they're HQ'd in the US, have to adhere to the GDPR for their European customers. So the GDPR kind of follows the data. So wherever that data is and whoever that data is on, they have to, if they're European or EU, they have to adhere to it.
Understood. So what actually is it going to say then? What's going to change?
Well, it's very much putting the ownership of what happens to your data back in the customer's hands. So you're going to see a lot of tick boxes that the companies now have to ask their customers' consent about what they can do with their data. So you may have already seen them. I'm sure lots of your listeners have. There's a whole lot of tick boxes coming out now actually saying, please tick here because this is what we want to do with your data. If you agree for us to do it, tick this box. You're then going to be able to ask companies to actually transfer your data between organisations, which is interesting in itself. So if I've got an account with one energy company and I decide to swap it to another one, I have the ability to phone up my energy company and say, can you transfer my data to the second one? And that has all sorts of implications around how that data is stored, in what formats. And again, I have the right to say, actually, do you know what? I want that data deleted as well. So there's the right to be forgotten. You've then got a whole piece around building data protection into every service that's offered. So if you're a big organisation with digital online presence, with, let's say, you're an insurance company with health insurance, life insurance, or you're anything down to an estate agent, or anyone with a presence and keeping that customer data, so you can better understand and better service your customers. You have to build in data protection by default into everything you do. So it's going to cause companies just to step back and do kind of assessments before they put new products out to market, to understand how secure they are, what the data protection is, how they can audit who accesses the data. Mm-hmm. So there's a big bit around identities within organizations as well. So once you understand your data and where it lies, you then need to manage which staff can access which data, and then be able to audit who's done what when. So in that awful, in that awful situation where you do get a breach, you're able to turn around to the regulator or to your customer and say, we did everything possible, here's the audit trail, this is what we put in place to stop that happening. But unfortunately it has happened. So with the GDPR, I guess the biggest thing are the fines, right? So it's all over the newspaper around, it's going to be 20 million euros or 4% of your turnover, whichever's bigger. That's coming in GDPR as of May 2018. So if you look at some of the big high-profile breaches now, there's been a massive, loss of brand, bad PR, loss of revenue. But actually, when the GDPR comes out, these guys that have been breached up to now have avoided these massive fines. And I would say, lastly, interestingly enough, outside of the US, the GDPR allows for the first time the kind of idea of class action lawsuits from customers. So if you're a mobile phone provider that gets hacked, you can now not only suffer the fines, but also have a class action lawsuit put against you by your customer.
Very interesting steps. A couple of questions on that then. The actual data itself, obviously, we assume, is encrypted, and it should be encrypted very, very well. So even if there was a breach, as we've seen recently, that data should remain encrypted, shouldn't it?
It should do. I think one of the interesting stats on the survey that we've just done is that only 14% of companies have actually planned their compliance against the GDPR. Wow. And the GDPR clearly states that the encryption or pseudonymization, which is a
that's
whole
a great word.
Isn't that brilliant? Yeah,
pseudonymization.
It's taken me months to learn how to say it. Yeah,
so write it down. That's fabulous.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? So that pseudonymization is a big thing. So the GDPR is actually stating quite overtly that you should look at ways of encrypting and hiding and pseudonymizing your data. Yeah. And if you turn that on its head, that only 14% of companies have even planned their compliance, and within that only 38% are really still not aware of the rules of the GDPR. You're absolutely right. I think going forward, companies will look at data masking and encryption as a way of actually complying to a lot of the rules in the GDPR quite easily, actually. It's probably the biggest tick box against the majority of things. So you can kill many birds in GDPR with that one stone of data encryption and data masking and pseudonymization. There's that word again. Yes. But if you're an organisation that hasn't even thought of it, and in the UK alone, it's less than 15% claim they're ready for the GDPR. I think there's going to be quite a trend over the next 18 months to look at how to encrypt that data, because, as you say, if it's encrypted internally, if certain people can't access certain data, so you've got that thing around, depending on your job role, you can only see certain types of information or even certain fields. So when you give credit card numbers out, maybe the last four numbers are actually hidden from the person taking it. So there's a lot of things you can do. And then if you're storing data in the cloud, encrypt it. You're absolutely right. If you're trying to hack encrypted data, it makes it that much harder. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it makes it that much harder to get hold of any usable, sellable data if you're an organised hacking group.
Yes, you mentioned there sellable. That's an interesting thing. People who have our data currently, do some of them pass it on to other people without our consent, don't they? And they can make some money by selling your data to other people.
Well, that's right. Yeah. So alongside the internet that we all know and love, you've also got the dark web, and the dark web is this mysterious thing that pops up in the news every now and then, and it's where you can buy all those nasty things, shall we say? And one of the nasty things you can buy is hacked data, and it's a shopping market, and you start I guess the data originally that was hacked we've all heard about credit card details, but the interesting bit there is if you have your credit card nicked, the information around the credit card is probably only sellable for about 24, 48 hours, because you and I would work out that it's been nicked and we'd cancel that card, and therefore the information that's been stolen for that card has got a very limited lifespan. But if you hack an insurer or a hospital, which has got not only all your personal details, but potentially medical records, potentially where you go on holiday, everything about you, that is kind of limitless information, timeless information that can be sold quite often for a lot of money. A lot of there's been reports in the press of drug sort of cartels actually moving into hacking because they get more money from the data they nick than the drugs they sell, and it's a lot easier sitting in a room somewhere than having to smuggle drugs around Europe, so to speak. So there's a lot of people looking to make money out of this stuff, but it's important, I guess, for everyone to realise that most hacks actually happen from, if you like, trusted people, or supposedly trusted people within organisations. So if you look at some of the high-profile hacks recently, they were done by either people within the company themselves or one of the company's suppliers, let's say, nicking information from underneath their very noses for a number of months, rather than somebody in a bedroom in America stealing that information. So it's far more usual that data disappears from by way of people you theoretically know and trust doing something a little bit nefarious, or again by accident, than actually being hacked. So we do hear these stories about hackers, but it's far more usual to get hacked internally.
One of the things that's become a concern to me recently, and I've mentioned this on the radio before, it is contactless cards, which are being thrust upon us, whether we like them or not, by banks and building societies. Every time I'm offered one, I try and turn it down, and I can never seem to. And I've read and seen documentaries, horror stories about how easy it is to extract the data from a contactless card without even having it in your possession.
Yeah, that's right. So there are readers out there. I guess for everything that's invented, someone will come up with the reverse of how to steal it. So with the chip and pin, that was still the case, and that was you've heard of gangs doing that by even CCTV looking over your shoulder in petrol stations, nicking your PIN number, and you've got those kind of swiping machines that get put into ATMs around the place. And again, this is just, I guess, the next evolution, and people have come up with, again, interesting enough, antidotes to the devices now. So you can actually buy these funny little, they look like cling film wrappers that go around your cards, but they actually stop your card being nefariously swiped by one of these devices that people are carrying around. But you're right. But I think it doesn't matter how secure we try and make these things, or how easy we try and make it. So quite often these, the ease of use of something becomes its own worst enemy, because if it's easy to use, it's probably easy to steal or easy to hack, and it's just going to become more and more prevalent. So for every good thing out there, there's an equal and opposite reaction in terms of trying to steal that data.
I'm a little off topic here, but it's interesting maybe to our listeners. The other day I was sent by my bank here in Spain information about an app which they now have, which you can now use to buy stuff with. And in order to use the app, they send you a sticker which you attach to the back of your phone, which basically says, "Hello, I've got the app that you can nick my money from." I mean, it's ludicrous. It's like putting an advert on your phone.
That's crazy. Now, I haven't heard of that one at all. But I wouldn't touch that one.
No, but believe me, it went straight in the bin. So this new law, then, you mentioned there a date, I believe, of 2018. Is that when it will all be working and in place? And if they don't comply, that's when they're in trouble?
Absolutely right. So what are we now? July. So companies have got the best part of 20 months, let's say, to get everything in place. And it's important again to realise that the GDPR, as it's called, the General Data Protection Regulation, it is a regulation, so it is coming into force. There's nothing the member countries can do about it to get out. And equally, if you, as we were saying earlier, if you're a non-EU company HQ'd elsewhere, but you've got EU data, you still have to comply by it. So again, it's going to affect everyone in or out of the EU. But it's important, I guess, to realise that there's no such thing as actual compliance around it. So there's not a tick box that you can get a certificate and go, we are now compliant with GDPR. Sure. It's a series of quite strict and stringent guidelines, but they are only guidelines, and it's a stick without a carrot, because they're not quite telling you what the carrot is, but that if you don't do certain things, you're going to be, hefty fines, lawsuits, all that sort of lovely stuff are going to come your way. But then they do give you some nice hinters around what you can do to be compliant. And the interesting bit there again is that it could actually be a godsend, because at the moment, if you're a pan-European organisation, you've got 28 different in-country data protection acts to deal with, which can be very cumbersome. Each one has got its own nuances and its their own understanding of what data protection means and the requirements around that. So with the GDPR, it could make life easier for companies, because they just now have to adhere to one thing across 28 countries. And then they are, in inverted commas, compliant and are seen to be doing the right things to protect their customer data. And then the very interesting bit is, if you look at what companies are doing when they're actually scratching their chins going, all right, how do we go about this? One of the first things they're doing is actually looking at the data that they're processing. So you quite often find silos of information that are duplicated. People have, within organisations, let's take me, I might have 2 or 3 accounts with my bank, and actually I look like 2 or 3 different people on 2 or 3 different systems. And it's an opportunity for organisations, however small or large, to actually look at their data, consolidate their data, and actually work out, right, why are we processing this data? Do we actually need that bit of customer data? Can we get rid of it? So it's also an opportunity to save money, to streamline operations, even cut down on software purchasing costs. So if you understand who you're dealing with, you may be able to cut down on licensing costs, and cut down on storage costs. So again, it's not just a nasty thing that's going to come and bite people. It actually, it could give companies a chance to reevaluate what they're doing with the data they're processing, and actually, can we streamline what we're doing to make compliance to GDPR a lot easier? There's
one bit of it which you talked about, which as a kind of techie worries me spectacularly, which is the line that if the public chooses to withdraw consent for organisations to process their personal data, so you say to them, look, I don't want my data on your system, the organisations will be obliged to delete all related information. Really? How are they going to police that?
That is one of the I don't really know answers, Bill. To be really honest with you, it's a difficult one.
I mean, you and I both know if we want to store something nefariously somewhere on a drive somewhere, then we'll just do it. And we'll just say, oh, yeah, we deleted it off our main server. That's done. Thanks very much.
Absolutely right, and then you get into this very strange conundrum as well, because if I do, let's say I've got your information and I do delete it properly, you come back to me and say, can you show me that you've deleted my data? I've got no audit trail to show you I've deleted my data because I've deleted it.
Yes.
And you've got other situations where you might ask for your information to be deleted, and 2 or 3 years later you come back to your old bank, let's say, and say, I need my, I'm applying for a mortgage, I need my last 5 years bank statements, whatever it might be, and they go, well, we don't know who you are. You are deleted. We do not have that information. We don't even remember having you as a customer. So there's a few conversations around that. One of the things that's been going on is Google have I think it might actually have been in Spain that Google have agreed that people, one of the things they've done is that you can make yourself unsearchable on Google. So there's one way of being forgotten. So it's not quite the same as getting a bank or an energy provider to delete stuff, but it's all to do with GDPR. You can make if you want to, Google will make you unsearchable. So there's one way of being forgotten, which is quite cool. And the second thing is going back to the data encryption. It looks like, if you read the sort of between the lines of GDPR, if you if you can demonstrate to a customer that, you have been forgotten to all intents and purposes, and actually anything that remains about you is stored somewhere, but it's fully encrypted, a QED, nothing can happen to it.
Yeah.
That could be a way, and I say could because I'll be honest, I and many other people aren't 100% sure about whether that's a way around it, but that could be a way around it. So it goes all the way back to that data masking and data encryption and pseudonymization. And then you get the interesting bit again, so there's a little bit of conundrum there. So even if the data is pseudonymized, there are ways and means of identifying people, even if the data is encrypted, because you look at, if you've got 4 brothers and 4 sisters, it's very unlikely that many other people have 4 brothers and 4 sisters. So whether it's got your accurate information or not, if it still looks like someone with 4 brothers and 4 sisters, people can make educated guesses about who they're talking to. So, it's that right to be forgotten, I think, is going to be the most interesting area, and how people are looking to do it is varying, and I think there's going to probably be some more steering from the EU about what they actually mean around that.
Yeah. Fascinating chap, Jamie. If people want to find out more, your website is identitymethods.co.uk.
That's right, and we actually have written an ebook about the GDPR, a very easy kind of sitting on your sofa for 10 minutes read about the 10,000-foot view of the GDPR, what it means to you, and also we've got a kind of 9-step things you should do right now if you're not doing anything around the GDPR, which we can help with. But I'd recommend that people go and read the book, because this impacts anyone from a 2-man organisation right up to a 22,000-person organisation across the member states.
Fabulous. Identitymethods.co.uk. Jamie, thank you so much for coming on and being so eloquent about that, and for teaching me new words, pseudonymisation.
Thanks, Bill. It's been a pleasure.
All right, all the best to you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care.